Welcome to the Grazing Grass Podcast, episode 39.
I'd say start small, build your plan out, and be prepared for your plan to fail and to need to adapt.
You're listening to the Grazing Grass Podcast, helping grass farmers learn from grass farmers, and every episode features a grass farmer and their operation. I'm your host, Cal Hardage. On today's show, we have Thomas and Cody of Foggy Bottoms Boys, and they have an organic Jersey dairy, grass-fed lamb, fine wool sheep, grass-fed beef, laying hens, and a tiny farmer. Stay tuned to learn about their journey and their operation. However, before we talk to Thomas and Cody, can you do me a favor? Go to grazinggrass.com and sign up for our email list. We're busy working to improve the website and make it more useful for the community. One more thing, we are changing our release schedule and will release new episodes on Wednesday every other week. The reason for this change is due to a health issue that we're dealing with. If you're interested at the end of this episode, we'll give you a little bit more information about that. But enough of that. Let's talk to Thomas and Cody. Cody and Thomas, we want to welcome you to the Grazing Grass Podcast. We're excited to have you on.
Hey, we're excited too to be
Yeah,
here.
thank you for having us.
Yeah, from Northern California, Ferndale base, 95536.
You got to throw out that repping, huh?
Yeah,
Very good.
absolutely.
Well, tell us a little bit about you all and your operation.
Well, I'm certainly the quiet one on social media, but in person, probably a little bit more loud and obnoxious.
And so I'm actually a sixth generation farmer here in Ferndale. My family settled here in the 1860s, and we are still farming that original farm, and we've added four others over the years. And so along with Thomas, we also farm with my parents and then my grandparents, who are supposed to be retired, but as with most farmers, they never really retire. And we have an organic Jersey dairy. We raise grass-fed lamb as well as fine wool for yarn and blankets, grass-fed beef, and pastured laying hens.
Yeah, don't forget Teeny Farmer.
Oh, and we have a small human too. We're raising a small human.
Yeah, he's really the highlight of our day and a lot of our social media, just because it's quite amazing to be working together side by side with four generations on the farm daily.
That is pretty impressive. And, you know, it's so important to enjoy those moments.
Oh, and he makes every day
Yes.
enjoyable.
Yeah.
You all have a lot going on. Growing up, did you both think you'd end up on a farm?
Well, I'll start. So initially, I actually went to college. I went to Oregon State and majored in rangeland ecology with the intent of going to law school and focusing on water law. And I took a break between graduating with my bachelor's of science and going back for law school, and I never went back. And while I was always really passionate about ag, I grew up milking cows and, on the dairy and with the beef herd, and did not think that's what I wanted to do. So I left for a year, well, for college. Then I spent some time working for a niche meats and agritourism company, and just really discovered that there was something about home that I really missed and found my way back.
Yeah, and I came from a family that had dairying on both sides, both my mother's and my father's. And what I really knew, I think it was at age 8, I told my dad, I'm always going to love animals and I'm always going to be involved. And he literally challenged me, son, you're too curious about too much to just be involved with animal agriculture. And eventually, hey, it did happen. I stuck to it.
Very good. I remember when I went to college and I went out to the dairy there at OSU and applied for a job. And he's like, and the herdsman was like, now you grew up on a dairy? Because most kids who grew up on a dairy, they don't want to come out here and work.
No, usually you run.
Yeah, you got to take a little bit of break.
Yeah.
And my run was going to marketing school. So I went and got a degree in behavioral consumer science and marketing. And so that's kind of playing a big role in my part on the farm here and marketing our product and sales.
Oh, yes. And so you finished college at that point? Did you head back to the farm?
So I took 4 years and worked for a niche meats and agritourism company as their poultry division director for North America. And so I was in corporate ag for a short period of time, working with several thousand, tens of thousands of birds at a time, and discovered that was not what I liked, and I was not cut out for corporate anything.
And I was trying to climb that corporate ladder in, one of those big coffee chains, and decided to move back home and join a nonprofit to really focus on food security for my community and small agriculture, working together with slow foods.
Very good. And then at what point did y'all come back to the dairy?
It'll be s- no 8 years. So we came back
Yeah,
8 years ago now, and at that point, the farm had already diversified into beef cattle, which we've actually had pretty much all along. We were
yeah,
selling them into a local grass-fed beef program, and we came back with rabbits at the time, angoras for fiber, and that led into a diversification of sheep and Angora goats for mohair as we kind of traveled down the
yeah,
route towards creating our own yarn line and the
yeah.
various faux pas that came along with that and
The
mistakes
fiber
we made.
exploration road.
Yeah, and Thomas added chickens almost immediately, and we've experimented with various species of poultry, but have always kind of circled back to laying hens.
Yeah, yeah, and I really enjoyed chickens from the get-go. Always have had them. There's been a few years of my life that I haven't, and it's going to continue, I think, until
For quite
until
a
we
while.
until we die.
Oh, yes, yes. One thing before we continue on with your all's journey, what kind of laying hens are you partial to?
Yeah, well, I really enjoy a variety of different birds just because our part of our marketing scheme is colored eggs. So we'll have greens and blues and whites and dark browns and light browns. Australorps, though, are my favorite. They're the most consistent and they have the hardest form eggshell based on the pasture ground that we raise them on.
Oh, yes, very good.
Yeah.
And I do think you bring up a excellent point there about the colored eggs or
Yeah,
just a variety of colors that seems to be pretty popular right now.
absolutely.
Yeah.
It keeps it interesting when you open that carton.
Yeah, unless your
Right.
customer thinks that the eggs that are green have been rotten, and that's happened several times.
Yes.
Oh, no.
There's a
I
certain amount of education that has to come along with colored eggs, but
that never crossed my mind that someone would think that, but,
Yeah,
um,
especially when I gave a special customer basically all colored eggs, and then she kind of refused them thinking they were all rotten.
oh, no. That's interesting. It's just a factor I hadn't thought about. Now, when you all came back to the farm and you talked about some of the enterprises that you added, the dairy was already going and the beef were was already there. Were those being managed regeneratively? Were you all doing rotational grazing? How were they managed? Or and then how's that compared to now?
yeah, so there's been some changes, mostly in the area of the beef cattle. The dairy actually, so the part of California that we live on has a lot of small organic dairies, and we've been using in this area
Yes.
short duration, high intensity strip grazing or mob grazing since since I was 6, and I'm now 33, 34. So it's been happening for quite some time here. So that was a practice that's really been in place for over 20 years, coming up on 30 now, that farmers here have been using that practice. And there's some amount of things like no-till drilling and when it comes to seeding or using yeoman's plows and fields. But definitely for us, there were aspects coming back with a range ecology degree that we changed, and some new practices that went into place on the farm. Most of it was in the area of the beef cattle. There was just where they were. It was a lot of set stock, set stocking. And as we've kind of moved our leases to other ranches, now we're really doing a lot of strip grazing. Um, mostly, on a right now we're on a 2-day rotation just because of the time we have with hay, with milking. The dairy takes a lot of time out of your day, but we have the cows. There's rotation. They rotate between 10 pastures, and then those are strip grazed as we move through them as well.
So when you say they're rotationally grazed and you have 10 pastures or strip grazed, so about how long do they spend in each pasture? How many strips do you get out of it?
Oh, 20 to
Oh,
probably
yes.
about 20 to 25 strips, depending on how intense
Yes.
we're going. Yeah, they're fairly large pastures. Um, yeah, so we're able to stretch right now we're utilizing fields, especially as we're going through the drought. We've been able to stretch our feed and actually really utilize them better by strip grazing. And that's been a major difference for us as we've gone into this drought season that we're all in right now, especially in California. We're actually not having to decrease herd size with our beef cattle just by managing our pastures more appropriately.
And you're in a drought like much of the Western US. How bad is the drought there?
It's not good.
Yeah.
Well, as I said that, I'm thinking, well, a drought is pretty bad no
Yeah.
matter what.
So I will say we live on the north coast of California. We're up in the redwoods. Our average rainfall, depending on where you are, kind of where we in the area that we farm in, it's 40 to 60 inches of rain a year. So we're probably at
Okay.
what? I think we're at 30 this year,
Yeah, yeah.
25, 30. So we are, significantly lower than average, and that has put a lot of pressure on us. There is irrigation that's utilized here. It's all groundwater irrigation. We only irrigate on our dairy. Our beef cattle are not irrigated. The ranch where our sheep are up on the hills is not irrigated, and neither is the island, which is where we grow alfalfa and then also do grazing with our sheep on the stubble. And that's actually out in the river.
Oh,
So
yes.
that's sub-irrigated to some extent from the river, but the river is extremely low this year. So even that's pretty dry. We had a 50% crop failure on second cutting alfalfa, and we're looking at about a third
Yeah, it'll be a thing.
a third of our acreage that's alfalfa actually being cut for third cutting. So we're it's significantly lower compared to a normal year where we would have 100% crop success all the way through third cutting.
Oh, yes. Is your drought a multi-year drought as well?
Yes, this is
Yeah,
year two.
yeah, and this is a worse year than it was last.
Much worse year than last year. So last year was kind of the preparation for it, but I don't think any of us quite anticipated how severe it was going to be. Um, we were able to prepare, knowing that it was going to be a drought year. We were able to prepare to some extent for it. We decreased our cow herd with the dairy cattle. We cut back our sheep probably a little too intensely for what we ended up with, and then we've had to, change how we've managed the beef cattle. When we wean, we weaned a
A month
month
early.
a month
Yeah.
early compared to where we normally would be. And with the fires and the droughts, we've also had to change our breeding seasons with the sheep.
And we like to be hopeful and have a perspective of, the sun is on the horizon and it will rise again.
Hey, they're saying there's rain tomorrow, so
Yeah,
we're
yeah, we might
hopeful.
get
Right.
yeah, there it is, yeah. Even at that tenth of an inch, that doesn't always pan out. But it's important for us to realize that we're growing most, if not all, of our own feed, and the only input that we have from feed is a little grain that goes into the parlor when we're milking. So it's important for us to realize that as a part of a larger system, we're stockpiling for winter rather than doing winter grazing stockpiling. And so now we've got a convergence of two factors that we need to consider, and that's the grazing pastures as well as the cut grass or cut alfalfa. Some of those pastures are used for both, depending on the year. And this year we had to graze all of some of our grass hay pastures and not put up so much into the barns.
On your environment there, what kind of temperatures and how long can you typically graze throughout the year?
Yeah, so Temperature wise, we're California is known for its Mediterranean climate. The redwoods are actually classified as a rainforest. For us, generally, we're looking at like a 20 to 30 degree swing in temperature. 40 is pretty cold, and 75, 80 is hot. So usually we're kind of in that 50 to 60 range all year, and that's just kind of where we stay. Uh, we're not looking at drastic shifts in weather,
Right.
which is nice.
Yeah, it is nice, isn't
Yeah, it's very nice.
it?
Makes it hard to travel out of the area because we're not prepared for cold or heat.
That's right. Yeah, I grew up in Northeast Oregon in a little town called Union, and it could be anywhere from -5 degrees in the winter with 2 feet of snow to 110, and you're sweating your hats off and just switching them out throughout the day.
Oh, I understand that. I'm in Oklahoma. Now,
Oh, yes.
interesting tidbit that I doubt I've shared on the podcast before. My wife is from Hawaii. So
Oh,
Oh.
wow.
everyone's always like, "Why did you move to Oklahoma?"
That's like perfect weather.
Yeah, it's pretty nice out there. I can't afford land or cattle out there, but it's pretty nice.
Oh, no
No, no.
kidding, no kidding.
So as you all work through this drought and you've reduced numbers some, what are some other things you've done to kind of combat it and prolong your grazing?
Yeah, so we've intensified our grazing. We implemented with the dairy cows. Usually we're on a 12-hour rotation on the dairy. And so this year, for several of our fields, we went to 6-hour rotation. So we were, setting up two fences, taking them down partway through the day. That way we could utilize our pasture better. Um, with our sheep, we've had to do a few, normally they would spend the summer on the hill and then they'd move to the island for lambing and fall cleanup of the alfalfa fields. Instead, we end up staying on the island longer as fields began to fail, and we moved the sheep out to graze those fields earlier. That way, we could stockpile feed on the hill for fall, and then the sheep are currently up there lambing some of our fields that are less accessible in winter, and then so they're lambing on those fields. They'll move back to the island and clean up the fields that we will be cutting this coming week, and then they'll go back to the hill for winter. So we've had to do a bit more juggling where the sheep are and how we're rotating them around. Uh, and then the beef cattle has been really just intensifying our use of mob grazing and trying to utilize that better, weaning calves early. Uh, there's been the destocking, and then we also do use irrigation on the dairy. And also on our heifer ranch where we raise our dairy heifers, and that's where we finish our grass-fed beef. So it's kind of 50-50 between finishing grass-fed beef and dairy heifers. And so we've been using more, well, not more alfalfa irrigation, but
Mhm.
we've been utilizing irrigation smarter, we hope. We only run it at night when our evapotranspiration rates are lower and when the wind decreases, so you're not just spraying it all over. And we've been trying to really be careful as to, checking soil moisture before we dump water on any ground, to make sure we're getting the best use of
Oh,
it.
yes.
And one thing we've done as well is we've always prioritized diversity within our plant communities, and so that's lent itself to adapting and going through this drought more successfully rather than having pastures that are routinely farmed and only consist of a few plants. Instead, we have most of our pastures that have been farmed were less farmed in 1964. We've done some interseeding since then, just with broadcasting and using the animals to tramp that seed in through the winter. And so we have really diverse plant communities there. And those are really, as we know, a diverse community is a more resilient community. So as we're facing the challenges of less water, it's giving, those plants that are better adapted to it, like our terrestrial clovers, um, a greater opportunity to be prevalent this year.
And on the short side of that, we are able to speak to our audience, and that's really through social media and our email marketing that we have. And folks definitely understand that a resilient pasture formation, and the grasslands, the rangelands that we have are very important to carbon sequestration and actually participating in climate change mitigation.
Do you find that that's really important to your audience or to your customers?
Oh, absolutely. I think showing that we're, active participants in a climate solution is incredibly important to our consumers. They want to know that we are being proactive, and they really want to see what we're doing. And so being able to use Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, we can show, what's happening on the farm, what are the practices that we're using, and then we can support it with academic studies, and be able to answer questions about the specific plants we're using or how these practices benefit local ecology and plant communities.
Very good. You know, I think that's really important, but sometimes I worry that that's not carrying over and gets lost in the translation to our audience and how important that is to them. I think sometimes they say, "Yeah, it's important," but then when it comes to their dollars and they spend, sometimes it's not as important.
Absolutely. And from the marketing standpoint, what we're finding is that we can be a little sassy, we can be a little sexy, we can be a little funny, and then we just drag all the rest of the information in with what we're doing, whether it's our videos for weekly updates or Cody's creative TikToks. There's always a little bit of sprinkle of information. So just like any good educator would do, trying to make things fun at the same time while you're learning, and in that way, it's not seen as such a hard leap. And when you actually do make that purchase, the consumer feels even better about that purchase and wants to come back.
Yeah, I think you bring on or you hit on some really good topics there, just on your marketing, making it fun, but then including that information in there. Um, you guys do at least from what I'm seeing, you all do an excellent job with marketing.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, we try to be informative and share information, but what we found is, that most people don't want to be told what they're supposed to know and think.
Right.
And if, you can add it in a fun context, if it's, lip syncing to a video on TikTok and you add a few, lines about something to do with sheep or with beef cattle, it makes it informative. Or we do like have a whole series where we talk about our breeds of sheep and rate them from 1 to 10, and it's usually kind of snarky commentary, but people really engage with that, and they're learning about breeds of sheep and the sheep industry as you're doing this, but it's presented in kind of a fun way that it doesn't seem like education. I think that's we found really
Right.
important way to make that connection, share what we're doing, and then also bring people back to our website to buy a steak or a t-shirt.
That's right. And we've learned not to piss off the textile community in that video
Yes,
series.
yes.
Now, as we move back to your animals a little bit and your practices during the drought, have you noticed a decrease on milk production? You still doing pretty good, or your cow's still doing pretty good with the new grazing? Has it improved milk production?
So overall through the summer, we have noticed a decline in production, and a lot of that has to do with our pastures early on were older because we were going into a drought, and we were kind of stockpiling feed for the summer, where normally we would have cut it for hay. And so utilizing that shorter grazing period really got them to optimize that forage and helped us keep that production up or even drive it up in some instances. As we went through that older feed, and dairy cattle really need high nutrition. They've got to be kept on a high nutritional plane to optimize production and to keep that up. And so as we went through that and went into shorter feed, it was shorter and it wasn't as high quality as we'd have liked. And we've definitely seen a decline in production since then, which has been a struggle of just trying to balance that with actually what's best for our pastures. Um, our beef cattle have been finishing out like no problem
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
all through the drought, and our ewes are actually probably we had an incredible breed up. They were on a super high plane of nutrition when we were breeding, and so our fecundity rates are starting to look like they're going to be pretty good as we start lambing.
Yeah, their condition is probably better in some cases, just
Yeah,
because
than
we
we've
have been
ever had.
focusing on them quite a bit.
So
Very good, and hopefully you'll have a nice lambing percent this season.
we're hoping so. It's looking like it's going to be at least 180%. So
Oh,
based on the first few days of lambing,
oh yeah.
Already have a bummer.
already have a bummer.
Well, I hope that continues for you. With the sheep, with fall lambing, do you notice a decrease in your lambing percent versus spring? And I know that's kind of a could be an easy question if from my point of view, because in my experience, spring has a higher lambing percent, but you're working with some different breeds, and while I assume that's true, I don't know for sure.
No, so we actually don't have a lower lambing percentage. One of the
Oh
reasons
yes.
we switched to fall lambing entirely this year, with the exception of a few sheep that are bred for show lambs, um, everything's lambing in the fall. And one of the reasons we did that is that breeding season for our spring lambing fell during the peak of fire season. And in the last two
Oh,
years,
okay.
we noticed that our lambing percentages were dropping pretty drastically. Uh, as we were trying to breed ewes when it was really smoky, there were days where the sun, we've had days where the sun never rose. It was dark all day long. The chickens never came out of the coops just because there was so much smoke. And so, as we were looking at how we were going to push our lambing percentages back up, uh, fall lambing was the best option there. We also are able to put them on a pretty high plane of nutrition in the fall or in the spring as we're breeding for fall lambing. So it works really well
Right.
for flushing just on pasture. And with
Oh
our
yes.
grazing, um, we want to butcher lambs predominantly in the spring. We do sell lamb throughout the year, but there's usually the highest demand in the spring. So taking those fall lambs, wintering them, getting a spring flush on them, and then harvesting them worked really well for our production system as well. And the Rommeldales and Horned Dorsets breed all year long. So
Yeah.
getting them to breed at any point is no problem. As long as you meet their nutritional needs, they are ready and willing to breed up.
Although Cody did have a great idea one season in transition that we would be lambing in the middle of winter, and I've never lambed in the middle of a wet, soggy winter, and I will never do it again.
No, it was pretty
Oh.
miserable.
Oh
and
yeah.
and we pasture lamb. We don't jug lamb. Uh, the
Oh
one thing I
yes.
will give Rommeldales and Horned Dorsets credit for is even lambing in the middle of a terribly wet winter, they are great moms and they will lamb on pasture
That's right.
and dry those lambs off, and
That's right.
they shelter up under the trees and take care of them.
They do.
But it's a lot nicer to do it this time of year when the weather is very amenable to getting lambs up and moving and not being wet sheep and wet shepherds.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Um, Jumping back just a little bit, and you're talking about changing your breeding season. That just hammers home that idea. You know, Farming's local. You got to look at the circumstances, the conditions you're working with, and figure out what works in your system. So I think that was a really good idea there, Cody, to try out the fall lambing to get around the smoke issue.
Yeah, and it works. The fall lambing works well with our shearing schedule as well. And so for us, it's really just been the best case scenario.
Okay, you bring up something right there that I'm not familiar with. And I say this, I went through FFA in high school, so I saw all the people showing lambs and all the shearing and trimming they did on their lambs. And I showed dairy cattle, and I much preferred my dairy cattle. But when you think about your shearing process with your ewes, how often do you do that? And is it something you do? Do you hire someone to do it?
Well, I'm gonna talk about this one because it was a conversation on the car right before we started recording today. And that is just, if Cody had the opportunity to shear our sheep and keep them carved out all year round, we absolutely would.
The show sheep.
The show sheep that
Yes.
is, which is the younger generation of the stock. But what we end up doing is as one full shearing for our commercial flock, and then we do what is called tagging, of course, for them and for those kill strips for the animals that we're going to take to butcher on another time of the year, just depending on when it's necessary. But when we're talking about fiber and utilizing fiber, it's also a very important and key aspect to making sure that we have the right staple length. And another part of that is something that when we're considering the type of or the time of year that we're growing out that wool, when you have a bad winter, there's the opportunity for the fiber in the fleece to get weak and break even. So that
Oh,
causes
okay.
for a yarn or a roving that's actually not as stable when it comes into its final form.
Very interesting. I just learned a whole lot in a short period of time that I didn't know. Uh, my big problem with wool sheep here, and I'm not, I say my big problem, I haven't tried wool sheep, okay? Um, but we have cuckaburs. It,
Oh, yeah,
do you
Oh
all have
man,
some plants out there that cause some problems if they get in your wool? And how
they
do you
do.
combat that?
So our shearing time is pretty critical to that. When you're looking at your fleeces and sending them for final product, you need to have as little vegetative matter in the fleece as possible. And using a fall shearing helps with that, just in that right now, like we sheared end of August.
yeah,
And so as a lot of the grasses are seeding out and getting to the point where they get into the fleece, our sheep are down to no fleece,
Oh,
and
yes.
so we can put them out into that tall grass to graze now. And up until that point, we have to be very careful not to have them in tall grass that's seeding out, as that would get into the fleece or into thistles or anything that might, degrade our fleece quality.
or you can get yelled at by your husband because you throw hay over the
Yes,
ewes
that is
after
that is
they were
absolutely
just
important. No one
shorn.
ever throws hay over the top of the sheep. It has to be dropped into the field.
And that comes down to a cost benefit analysis of if you have more vegetative matter in that product that's being the fleece that's being sent into a product, then you do pay a little bit more when it comes to making that clean and to making that so that it's a product that actually shines and is working well in the handle of the customer and the consumer that's using it.
That makes sense, and that timing makes sense. Yeah, and instead of continuing on about fiber, because just heads up for all the audience, we're going to come back to fiber and talk a little bit deeper on that for the overgrazing section. Let's jump
Great.
back over to the cows for a little bit in your marketing. So,
Yeah.
for your dairy cows, how do you market your milk?
Yeah, I had the opportunity to work with Rumiano Cheese Company. They've been around as a family-owned company since 1919, and they've gone from 7 facilities all up and down the west coast of California, making cheese rations for the government during uh, the World War II. And now I have one production facility up in Crescent City that's been there for a little over 70 years. And that's where all of our milk and all of our friends and neighbors, or most of our friends and neighbors' milks, go up to that processing facility. And they make cheese, obviously, but as well as butter, ghee, and on one square city block, they've also added the capacity to dry whey and lactose. And they ship that over to the Asian markets for baby formula, and the whey protein powder gets used here domestically as well.
So
Very
our
interesting.
milk isn't marketed by us.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, right.
We help market the products the best that we can, just to show in good faith that we really do enjoy all of the products. That's a funny story, but we are the conundrum of the dairy farmers. Cody can't have casein, and I can't have lactose, so we're the dairy-free dairy
Oh,
farmers,
yes.
depending on what product that
Yeah, we,
we're
we love the idea
consuming.
of it.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, yeah. But it's good that you have good things to say about you want that company to survive because it provides value for you and a market available for you.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
One thing is we think about dairies and what you're doing, it so much depends on the processor. Unless you are willing to work 48 hours and 24 hours,
Right.
because
Right.
there's just not
Exactly.
time to do everything. I love the idea of making cheese, and
Oh yeah.
I have I'm trying to convince my wife I wouldn't mind buying some dairy sheep or dairy goats and making a little bit of cheese. But then she reminds me, I don't have enough time as it is right now, so maybe I shouldn't do that.
Well, Cal, this is the first time I've heard you mention dairy sheep. I've heard you talk about dairy cows, but hey, I'd be interested in talking about those dairy sheep. Cody thinks that's a great idea too, don't you?
No, I think that's a terrible idea.
I find the dairy sheep fascinating. I went to a cheese making class in Missouri for making soft cheese from
Oh, cool.
sheep's milk.
Yeah, it's sheep's cheese is very interesting. I first had manchego a few years back, and I probably had it before then, but didn't realize it. But it's a different flavor profile that you can identify once you know what it is.
It is, and not to offend anyone, I find it better than goat cheese. I
Oh,
Oh,
absolutely.
I
for
just
sure.
um, goat cheese just well, it just depends on so many factors, and sometimes you get that um, as that buck flavor through it. Sheep
Yeah.
cheese, it's just
Yes.
so clean and smooth tasting. Like I said, I'm kind of busy, so maybe I won't do that right now.
Let someone else make it.
Yeah, put it on the
Right.
shelf for later.
Now, I love to eat it, so if you have some cheap cheese out there, hey, I'm your guy. On the beef cattle, do you all handle all the marketing for the beef cattle?
Yes, or I should say predominantly.
Yes.
At this point, yeah. So we have 80 cow calf pair. And what we do is we raise some of those for our own grass-fed beef program. We use all Angus bulls, and we're selecting for marbling and ribeye EPDs when we're selecting our bulls. But our cow base is also Angus, Black Baldy, Hereford, and some Murray Grey.
Oh, yes.
We like a little diversity in there. It keeps it interesting when we're working cows.
There you
Easier
go.
to keep track of, I'll
Easier to
tell
keep
you
track.
that
Yeah.
much.
Um, So, unfortunately, particularly in this area, anything that's not Angus is heavily discounted at sale.
Mhm.
It's about $20 a hundredweight lower. Um, so anything that has Hereford markings or is gray, might have horns, or is red, we don't sell into another grass-fed program. There's a couple local grass-fed programs that will sell weaned calves into, since we um, don't need all of our calves right now, especially since they're all born at once.
Oh, yes.
And so what we'll do is we'll sell those calves into another program. We'll finish the kind of odds and ends, and then we'll also purchase from other farms that we know, other ranches that have programs that meet our requirements, and we'll buy the calves that they can't sell that are not strictly black, and we'll finish those. So we end up with the ones that we market and grass finish are usually kind of a fun assortment of colors, but they're all really well bred, high quality steers and heifers. They just don't fit that certified Angus label that is pretty much required up here to sell animals at a premium.
Oh, yes.
And that's the neat part about working with our family is Cody's dad, Rick, has been around the beef cattle industry for a very long time and knows what the animal looks like on the hoof as if it were hanging. So Cody's been able to be trained by his dad over his lifetime about what that animal will look like and how it will finish out. And so when we're talking about butchering specific animals before we actually go to our kill dates, obviously that we have uh, months out. Sometimes I think we're already booked out nearly a whole year out right now. And what that looks like is, hey, if it's not ready to finish, then there's nothing else to replace it. And instead of three or four, you might end up with just two animals going to the butcher. And that's really part of our quality assurance program that may seem detrimental to the pocketbook, but very important to continuing to keep the customer happy with the type of finish and marbling that we're looking at.
Right. When they're ready, and if they're not ready, they're not ready.
That's right. That's
Absolutely.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. That's about as elegant as I get, but that's okay.
Very accurate.
Yes. Now, on the breeds, Hereford, Angus, fully familiar with. Murphy Gray's I've heard of it. In fact, I went visited a farm a month ago, and the gentleman's got a couple Murphy Grays. But Murphy Grays are not a breed that I see very much in my area.
They're not common here either. My mom got a random hare when I was probably 10 or 11, and she found them in a magazine, decided she really liked them, found the breed interesting, and went and bought a bunch of semen. Um, Actually, happened to email a Murray Gray stud. They had randomly shipped some to Humboldt County, and it was still sitting in the ABS salesman's tank like 6 years later.
Oh,
And
yes.
so she bought all that semen and proceeded. We had at the time, we had a small herd of beef cattle. I think it was about 20 head of cows. And she just started breeding all of our cows with it over a few years. And so she built up a predominantly Murray Gray influence herd. But as we've added cattle and, you know, they were selling into the local grass-fed programs that needed to be black calves. They've been using more Angus influence on them, but you still get quite a few gray calves popping up, and they still have that type, the Murray Gray type, which is we all really like.
Oh,
Tell us a
fun.
little bit more about that Murray Gray type.
Yeah, they're a more moderate cow. You don't end up with that, the extremes. They're 1,000 to 1,200 pounds. Not real tall, leggy, kind of compact, real wide set and stocky. They remind me of an oak table. They've got a leg in each
Oh, yes.
corner. They're just
Yeah.
real solid animals, and that's really the kind of beef that we're selecting for. We want animals that are stout, that are solid, stand on strong feet and legs, and a cow that has the body capacity to eat a lot and to carry a calf, but is not so big that she's just inefficient and wasting feed.
All excellent points. And with the Murray Gray, that's my understanding of them as well. I just don't have any firsthand experience with them.
Yeah, we like them.
Well, very good. You mentioned AI, and do you all AI the majority of the beef herd?
No, we did for quite some time, and then now we buy a bull. So we're on a 3-year rotation. So we run 3 bulls, and we purchase a new bull each year. And so we cycle a bull out and replace him. And so we have been using bulls out of other herds. Just the labor involved in artificial insemination on our beef herd is too high for the results. But on our dairy herd, it's entirely AI.
Yes, yeah. And all that makes sense to me, and that's kind of what we find. I miss growing up on a dairy, as I mentioned, we AI'd everything, and I miss the AI aspect on the beef herd. Um, so I do have a semen tank now, so I can AI a few. But really, when you get down to the cost of it and the benefit, it's really not practical. It's more something I enjoy.
Yeah, it does. It is nice to be able to select those features that you're looking for to breed in.
Yeah, if you're looking for certain genetic progress, it is a great way to make that progress quickly.
Oh yes, it
It's
is.
just the labor involved for us right now doesn't balance out. So,
I have an interesting story about sire directories. So I am a, I guess, a third generation dairyman, except I no longer dairy. So, my dad and mom dairied, my grandparents dairied. I remember being, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 up at my grandparents', and my grandpa kept all his sire books in a end table next to their sofa. So one day up there, I got them out. I'm going through them, and I knew enough at that time that cattle were worth more than the $15 he had wrote next to the bull. And I'm looking, so I start asking some questions, and maybe I'm a little bit older, maybe I'm 6 or 7, but I'm thinking there's an opportunity to make some money because if I can buy that bull for $15, I know I can sell him for more at the sale barn.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Sadly, it didn't
Yeah,
work
they're
that way.
No, that's not
yeah.
how they work,
No, they
unfortunately.
are pretty complicated. You gotta know what you're looking at.
Yeah.
And and you don't get the whole bowl for that
Right,
price.
yeah.
just just about an eighth of a cc.
Right, yeah. Moving on over to your poultry, you've ran poultry for quite a while. Um, are you just do
Yeah.
you do pasture poultry as well or just the laying hens?
Well,
Well.
yeah. That was this last year's adventure. With the pandemic, we really decided that laying pasture poultry, or excuse me, raising pastured poultry among the laying hens would be a good idea. And it was a great idea.
No, we definitely served a need within our community
Yeah,
by
yeah.
offering broilers.
We never had problem getting rid of them at a premium price.
No, we raised a lot of broilers. We sold a lot of broilers. We did full whole birds and parts. Um, but it also we have a lot going on, and we as the pandemic continued, we just had to realize that we couldn't be all things to everyone in the
Yeah,
community.
yeah.
Um, and so the broilers came to an end.
For now.
For yeah, yeah. We've done turkeys in the past. We did it once. They were not conducive to farm harmony between all members of the family.
Yeah.
So the turkeys, they were mischievous, and they had a habit of wandering half a mile back up to the barns and wandering into the milk barn or the hay barns.
Yeah.
And so once they were harvested, they never came back. Um, and now we just have the laying hens.
But they never laid on a clutch of eggs, and we didn't have any poults or anything.
No,
It
no,
didn't get
but
that bad.
no, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't like the duck. We had ducks for a while as well. That got incredibly out of hand.
You knew where I was going with that story.
It became known as the duck situation.
Oh, yeah.
There was, I think, 10 ducks originally, and by the end of the summer, there was like 90 ducks running around
Yeah.
the barnyards, and
Yeah.
they were not even supposed to be a business. They were supposed to just eat the snails and slugs.
And that they did for 2 solid years. We didn't have a snail or slug problem.
But now we have no ducks, and there's a hard and fast rule that ducks are not allowed on the farm
Mhm.
ever again.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
And they were runner ducks. They're not supposed to be
broody, but
yeah, they're
they
supposed to
did
be broody, but
Oh,
they
yeah.
certainly laid many egg and raised a mini duckling.
so many. But now so now we have the laying hens. There's 500 laying hens currently.
Currently, there'll be 2,000 in November.
Yeah, and we do all the egg processing on farm. We've had chickens on our farm. Right now, all of our birds are at our neighbors, and he's taking care of them. He got really interested in regenerative ag, and he wanted to use birds and try it out. And so we worked with him, and now he has gone really into the chickens, hence the 2,000. And I think all of our chickens are staying at the neighboring farm, and
Yeah.
we're handling all the egg washing, processing, and
Marketing
marketing.
and sales, yeah.
Very good. On the brooders, the discontinued program, did you all process them? Did you all have a processor close by?
No, so we did it all on farm. Unfortunately, one of the challenges with where we live in California is that nothing is nearby. We're about 4.5, 5 hours north of San Francisco. And so the closest USDA processing facility is 7 hours from
Oh,
us,
yes.
one way. So we did all on farm harvest. How California recognizes the federal exemption is, as with every state, is unique. And so it made it possible we could sell eggs or sell broilers direct to consumer, but there's limitations as to where we can sell or how we can represent the birds or market them. And we can't sell birds for anyone else.
Right.
And so it just became very cumbersome to handle processing them and then how we could legally market them,
Oh, yeah.
especially given our visibility through social media, what risks we are willing to take there.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get into a lot of red tape there.
Absolutely.
As you've gone on your journey to this point, what are some of the bigger challenges you all faced?
Oh gosh, bigger? Which one's small? Hmm.
Yeah,
Well, no challenge is ever small at the time of the
Yeah,
challenge.
this
that's
is very
true.
true.
Very true.
I think one of the early challenges was family buy-in.
Mm.
We
Oh,
came
yeah.
back to the dairy, and there was definitely, we're always on our phones and doing, playing on social media, and the value of social media wasn't at the time, very apparent, I don't think. Um, and so it was just seen as kind of like, wasting time, get off your phone and do something important. Uh, but out of that, we built a brand that's, allowed us to move forward and to diversify. And I think also, we were definitely had those moments where as we were diversifying, there were definitely missteps with species that we tried, and those did not create harmony on the farm. And that, so not those diversifications were not always seen positively initially. Now, looking back, I think everyone sees it as a positive progress. But when the goats went missing for 2 weeks and ended up on Fish and Wildlife, and we were all in a panic, I don't think anyone saw that as a positive moment.
I did.
So,
However,
Right.
that was no rift in my family threads. I definitely was ready for those goats to go.
My wife was ready for me to sell my goats when I sold them.
yeah,
Where water flows, goats can go.
there is
That is
there's
true.
no containing
Yes.
them. So we tried quite a few different goat options, and we have just come to the family conclusion that we are not goat people, and they are not meant to be on any farm that we operate. So we will not have goats.
There you go. Yeah. Where do you all see yourself going in the future?
Yeah, there's diversification on our farm that's being dialed in, and one way that we know that we're going to be able to be successful is by sharing that with others. It's an important part of my makeup and what makes me tick and what I get excited about and the value structure that I really subscribe to, and that's local food systems and having some sort of connection with a food hub, agritourism, and making sure that it's not just 1% or less than 1% of the population that is connected to food by way of direct support in their livelihood. We need to grow that number, and that will ensure our food sovereignty and food security, especially here on the North Coast. We've got four arteries in and out, whether those are the 101 or 299 or Highway 36. Those were closed, or three of those avenues were closed down during the summer. And usually we experience situations like that during the winter where there's slides or washouts or other challenges with the road just by simple visibility and causing accidents. But here in the summer this year, it really made it clear to me that we need to diversify in a way that is educating folks, and that's bringing people to the farm and doing workshops and presenting food in a way that makes it doable for them to participate.
On that area, are you already bringing people to the farm?
So we have offered some amount of farm tours. We had limitations on it, especially just there's a high prevalence of animal rights activism in our area. And so that's made
Yes.
it difficult to open ourselves up, especially as a dairy, because that tends to be kind of the target. So we're moving forward as the summer goes. We're expanding out into experiences where people who we're familiar with and we've interacted with, or our customers, are coming to the farm, and we're doing dinners, and they can have dinner with us and they can take tours of the farm. And so it gives 2 hours of our time at night, and we can kind of share the farm and a meal with them, and also show them a way to prepare what's produced on our farm, in a way that's accessible and also enjoyable. And so whether that's teaching them how to reverse sear a tomahawk steak, or to crust a top sirloin in coffee and sear that on the grill, it's all kind of a way of highlighting our product and also giving them that on-farm experience and letting them bring two friends with them when they do it.
N- That's a very creative way to mitigate some of the risks you have by having on-farm tours, but you're building that connection, and I'm sure those people, when they leave, they're lifelong customers.
Oh,
Absolutely.
yes.
That's what you're always looking for, the sales funnel. Starting with that awareness, but
Yes.
when you get those evangelists, those that continue to come back and share your product with others, yeah, that's really what we're looking forward to. And again, that's part of my value system is making sure people are aware that what and how we are farming is important for their values as well when it comes down to it.
And sharing a steak and a glass of wine with someone is always fun.
Don't forget the cheese.
Yes.
Well, Cody and Thomas, I've enjoyed your story thus far, but it's time for us to transition into the overgrazing section,
Great.
where we take a deeper dive into something about your operation. And I think tonight we're going to talk about wool, sheep, and fiber.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yes.
yes. Yeah, I think that's something that we need to bring to your podcast a lot. We've been hearing these wool versus hair sheep stories, and there's a whole nother faction inside those wool sheep.
Oh, yes. Well, do tell, enlighten all of us.
Yeah, so we raise two different types of wool sheep. We raise horned Dorsets, which are a medium wool breed, and then Rommeldales, which are a fine wool. So they have a fleece similar to a merino in that it's a really low
Oh,
micron.
okay.
So it's suitable for next to skin wear, whereas the horned Dorsets, being a medium wool, aren't necessarily ideal for next to skin wear, but they have a really abrasion resistant fleece. And so we have that used as sock yarn because your feet aren't so sensitive
Oh,
that they
okay.
need a 20 micron or lower fleece, uh, but they definitely wear on any garment that you wear. So using more abrasion resistant wool makes for socks that last longer. And
And
so,
I'm being raised on with the Suffolk sheep. I'm all about making sure that they're built out and conditioned to be eaten. And when I joined up with Cody and came down to the farm, I got him a couple of those merino sheep that I didn't realize what I was getting into because he had those fine wooled sheep before when he was in the 4-H. But wow, wow, it's a whole
yep,
nother animal. It's not just raising an animal and feeding it to properly condition it. It's looking at many different factors. And our Rommeldales are dual purpose essentially, so that we're raising them for fiber as well as meat, with the prevalent focus on the fiber, but being able to offer that meat product as well.
yeah, and so we definitely one of the aspects of raising sheep for fleece is that you have to manage those fleeces, and so that comes down to like we discussed earlier, our shearing times, sort of pastures they're on, their nutrition plays into that as well. Meeting their nutritional needs so that they can grow that fleece, and that you can reach a 3-inch staple length at the minimum. So because 3 inches is what a mill needs to process your fleeces. And then there's just that an entire part that comes at shearing and how you handle shearing. When we shear, we have a shearer come in and he shears, but he also shears our sheep as wool sheep. So he can't take second cuts, go back and clean up a spot that he missed because that would be a short staple length piece that would throw off a garment or would make a weak spot in a yarn, or a slob, like
Oh,
a
yes.
thick point.
Yeah.
So, he has to shear them with the intent that their fleeces need to be highest quality coming off. And then those fleeces are weighed and skirted. So they go onto a table, and we have a wool classer who comes and she helps us skirt the fleece and then grades them. And our sheep are both white and natural coloreds. And so the fleeces are graded as to their quality, whether or not they can go into a yarn or to blankets, or if they're low quality, they may be able to be put into roving, and we use those to make dryer balls that we sell.
You're the
Or
cause of my carpal tunnel,
yeah, or
future carpal
or
tunnel.
if they have a weak point, like a wool break where the sheep maybe had a fever at some point during the growth of her fleece, or for the year, or had a nutritional decline for some reason, the fleece will become weak and that's not usable. and those go into mulch, which we either use on the farm or we sell to marijuana growers um, as garden mulch.
Oh,
So
there
we
you go.
have to, divert our fleeces as to what's the appropriate use for them.
Okay, you've said a whole bunch of stuff I'm not familiar with. And one thing you mentioned was a nutritional deficiency or something causing a weak area in the wool so you don't get the right staple length. How do you tell there's a weak area in the wool?
Yeah, so a fleece is actually a record of that sheep's life over that year, from shearing to shearing. And so what happens is if there's a point where they're fevered or they have nutritional issues, they'll actually be, when you're looking at that staple length, there's going to be a line that runs through it. And if you grip each end of the staple or the lock between your fingers, your thumb and finger, and you just tug on it or shake it, it'll actually shred perfectly down that line. And so that's the weak
Oh,
point. And so before you send any fleece into the bag to be, sent to the mill, you test every fleece to make sure that there's not a weak point in that fleece.
so if a ewe has whatever or has conditions that lead to this weak area in the wool, that's going to be throughout all her wool.
Yeah.
So you can just do one test
Yeah, you just pull a
on the
s-
wool from one
Yeah.
sheep and it's good.
Yeah, well, so each sheep needs to be tested, but you'll just pull one sample from that fleece and test it. And that's part of why we shear in the fall as well. Now that we're doing fall lambing, is that lambing can be stressful, and if a ewe has a dystocia, that generally will cause a wool break because that's a stressful point in her life. And so by shearing right before lambing, not only are they cleaner, as they lamb, but it puts any wool breaks at the tip of the fleece. And if it's, as long as it's at the tip
Oh,
or the
okay.
very base of it, the fleece is still usable. And so you want to schedule your shearings on wool sheep around lambing as well as the season for vegetation.
Makes sense, but I'm not the person that needs to be saying it makes sense. I mean, it's just I find it really interesting though. Okay, so after you get the wool off and it's been graded, a- and I don't know what skirting is.
Skirting,
W-
you lay the fleece out on a table that has, it's a wire table, so any second cuts or bits of dirt fall through, and then you just go through and you pull off any parts that are felted or the part from around the rear end that might have muck on it, or any dirty bits. So all of that just gets tossed aside into the
Yeah.
tag bags.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What happens to the wool after you've done that and you've tested it?
So
What's the process for it after that?
depend this year we pulled samples on every fleece and those were put in a bag and they were sent to the lab so they'll be micron tested, so that way we can use that for breeding decisions and culling decisions to continue to push our sheep down to a 19 to 20 micron fleece, which is just the fiber diameter, and the finer the diameter, the more usable the fleece is for next to skin wear. And so we want a softer wool. Uh, and so we pull that sample and then it goes into the bag depending on where it's destined for. And so in the case of yarn, it'll go into the bag that's labeled for yarn. Someone has to, go in periodically and stomp on it to pack it down, as you add
Oh,
fleeces.
yes.
And then usually a small child gets tossed in there, and they
Teeny
can,
farm is not
yeah,
quite big enough
not
yet.
quite big enough. But and as once it you get enough fleeces in, they can get back out. But until that point, they have to hang out. And then we'll take that bag and we'll take it to the mill. The mill we work with is in Ukiah, so they're only 2 hours away, so it's pretty close. And they will wash it or scour it, and then they'll run it through carders and put it into roving, and then through their spinners. And because of their locality and them being a smaller mill, they're able to do some pretty specialty yarns for us. So they can change the colors of fleeces since we have natural colored sheep, so they can make natural tones to our yarns. So that way, every yarn that we're producing is pretty unique. And so one thing is we don't ever offer the same yarn one year and then do it again the next, because the
Yeah.
conditions
Oh,
that
yes.
generated that yarn are not going to exist, and our flock composition is not going to be the same to be able to do that same kind of yarn. And quite frankly, the mill probably doesn't remember how they got that one because they processed so many fleeces.
Well, and the one that we have carried through is our white. We've
We do have
helped,
100%
yeah,
white.
yeah, we have bred in a lot of white Rommeldale, and that's as far as a CVM or California variegated mutant. They're also known as is it's not very common. So what we are doing in that way as part of our breeding program is important to continue to keep the white so that those yarn freaks, those fiber freaks is what we call them, or
Very
ourselves,
affectionately.
very affectionately, is they able to dye and do the different processes on their end. We also have shipped back east to a mill when we're utilizing Angora rabbit fiber, which we also raise, and that's a lot harder to deal with. We don't raise a bunch of it, but it's something that Cody actually really focused on early on when breeding his rabbits, and that's a satin Angora. And you can probably speak a little more to that.
Yeah, they were a fine wool rabbit, and so it just added a sheen. We don't actually have them any longer just because the time involved with maintaining them, but we have probably 3 years worth of fiber from when we did raise them stockpiled, and that's, it adds a nice, halo, so as you work with the yarn, it becomes super fluffy, and so it makes this naturally fluffy yarn that's very shiny. And so as we've moved through our fiber exploration and adventures, we found that all these textures and tones and colors really impact how a yarn handles and how it sells, and that having that diversity in our yarn line makes it easier for us to reach those fiber freaks and the customers that want to, that people that really love yarn and wool, and they want to be able to try a variety of things from your farm. And so we've done that, and we've also partnered with other local farms. That way we can do some more exciting blends.
Has it been fairly easy? I think easy is probably the wrong word there, but developing the clientele for your fiber and the yarn.
I think the clientele has been particularly easy, actually, through
Yeah,
social media. The fiber community online is incredibly strong. I mean, there are Facebook groups, on Instagram. There's a whole like fiber talk on TikTok. So finding people that are value quality, farm yarns is pretty easy to connect with. We also have a very strong fiber shed in this area. And so making the connections to customers, and then the beautiful thing about yarn in relation or comparison to a steak is that it's really easy to ship yarn
yeah, and store.
and store,
Oh,
and
yes. Yes.
it's very easy to keep it, and it's very easy to ship it, and so we can send it all over the world, and we do. I think the biggest challenge with yarn has honestly been the processing,
Yeah,
finding a mill to work with, and then also just recognizing that those mills are heavily impacted, just like our meat processors are. And so, you might send your wool to the mill, but it's not coming back in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 2 or 3 months. It's going to come back in 8, 9, 10, 12 months. And so you have to plan for that sort of a delay,
Oh,
and know
yes.
that that's
Yeah.
that's just the process.
yeah. We don't even really market our fiber very much, just so we have it on hand for those that are curious or customers that have repeat uh, designs that they want to make for a friend or what have you with the same yarn. So we just allow that to kind of flow out as inventory
And we do,
as necessary.
and usually we do like a short holiday push,
Yeah, right.
and usually a short holiday push for us, even with our flock size of our flock, we'll end up selling out of most yarns.
Yeah.
Oh,
And the
yes.
one thing that we are able to do, which is really neat when it comes to after the shearing process, when we've really classified all those yarn as to usable or not usable in yarn, what we have done is made dryer balls, and they're a very fascinating and fun product. So instead of using a dryer sheet, you're able to utilize these felted wool balls in your dryer, and it actually soaks up and wicks the moisture away from the clothing while beating up or pounding or fluffing your clothing, and it just causes for a shorter driving or drying time, and allows for your clothes to end up with a little fragrance if you put it a little oil. We have a special little unique thing to our dryer balls. We put a little indention inside of them, and so when you are going to use them, you can put whatever essential oil you'd like to literally inside about an inch into the ball without the oil being on the surface,
And
and
transfer
so
into your
it
clothes.
doesn't transfer to
Oh,
your
yes.
clothes and stain. Yeah.
Yeah, I've read a little bit about using wool balls to save on money. You're not buying those consumable dryer sheets,
Yep.
and it improves the drying speed of clothes in the dryer and stuff.
And you're
Yeah.
supporting regenerative ag
Yeah.
and small farms,
Yes.
And
and
those that and those that are, have
yeah,
synthetic, allergies to some of the things that are on the dryer sheets, they don't have to worry about that. And you get to select what fragrance you would like your clothes to smell like.
yeah, they're great.
Yeah, well, I hadn't even thought about that aspect because I've tried to sell them to my wife a little bit. I may have to order some.
Please do, please do.
There we go. Um, but she's all about her essential oils, so that'll
There you go,
that'll
that'll
go
go
good
over
on
well.
my shelf spot. Yeah. Before we get to our final four questions that we ask all of our guests, there's one more topic I really want to cover, and it's not really grazing base, but I think on your all's website you do dove release.
Yeah, so actually, our doves are kind of grazers as well. I have a flight of about 35 white doves. Cody
They're
calls them.
white homing pigeons. They're not
Hey,
doves.
all pigeons came from a rock dove, okay? So we're really talking about doves. But yeah, these guys are for celebratory purposes, whether or not that's a event that you have for a bar mitzvah or a wedding or a funeral. They're used for all sorts of different ways to highlight an event or to make a moment of a special value, and that's something that's been happening for centuries. The white dove release, and so it's a fun thing that we're able to do on the farm and off the farm for guests. I'm the chamber president here in Ferndale, and we release them for every parade that we have, which is like 13 parades during the year. And then at our local fair, where we have the horse races, I sing the national anthem and then release the doves there at the end.
And the cool thing about a dove release as a business is you release them and someone rents them out, they release them, and then they fly back home and you rent them out again.
Yeah.
So they come right back and they get to do their job all over again.
Yep, that's pretty neat. But they are often seen grazing the grass out in the field.
Oh yes. So your loft for your doves. So are they free roaming, or
It depends on what season, so I don't let them hatch out all year round, and I have gotten a practice now down to where I have a little, cage outside of their door, their one direction door, and so if I am raising, young stock or young birds that are going to, uh, be flying with the rest of the crew, I start them off by letting them go in and out of that one door, with a cage right in front of that. And then otherwise, after a little bit of practice, they're able to slowly, one at a time, go out with the rest of the crew and learn what it means to fly back with them. And I just do short little test flights. So you'll start at the neighbor's farm, and then you'll go down to the corner, and then a mile away, and then 5 miles, and these guys can actually do well with several hundred miles, but we don't do that as a part of our practice. We just stick with inside the valley.
and how many miles is that?
Only 15 is our
Oh, okay.
max.
Well, that's just super fascinating to me. When I read old farm books, um, from the 20s, 30s, and 40s, they talk about pigeons and raising squab, and
Yeah.
it fascinates me. Pigeons, doves do. However, my wife says we are not eating squab.
I do
And
not recommend it.
Well, you raised
I
mini squab
raised
for years.
squab for years, and I am not a fan, but some
oh
people love
yes,
it. So
I, I appreciate you indulging me. Just giving me a little information on that, even though it's not super related to the podcast. But
no, we're
Yeah,
happy
absolutely.
to.
Just another diversification.
it's time for our famous 4 questions. Every episode has we ask the same 4 questions of all of our guests. Our first question: what is your favorite grazing grass related book or resource?
Mine's not necessarily just based on grazing grass, but it is about fleece and sheep. It's called Vanishing Fleece by Clara Parks. It's kind of the process that she describes in that book of what she went through. She started off just by rating and interviewing different sheep producers or fleece producers. And after about 10 years, she actually started getting a little skin in the game herself and got gifted a large bale of fleece and had the opportunity to bring on many other individuals with her in that process. And reading that book or listening to the book, as we often do here on the farm, it it was really interesting to see the parallels between her process and learning and mine as well, and picked up a lot of different small nuances that I continue to learn and improve upon my marketing skills today.
Yeah, and I have 2 that I would, um Principles of Range Management by Holochek, which was actually one of my intro to range textbooks, and it's just one that I always come back to as a reference, when I have a question. And then, Pastoral Song, which is James Rebank's newest book that he just published, and if you're not familiar with James Rebanks, he's a shepherd from the Lake District of England, and it's really kind of a great accessible introduction to regenerative agriculture as he tells the story of kind of himself finding his way to regenerative ag and his family's uh, challenges as they became a more regenerative farm. I think it's just a great, not only is it entertaining, but it's a great way to introduce someone to regenerative agriculture.
Oh, very good. So I've got a couple more books to add to my to read list.
Yeah, they're all good.
Wonderful. And I'm always now I'm going to say this. I'm always excited when people come on and they say a different book or resource that we haven't heard about or I'm not familiar with. But at the same time, I don't discount those people that comes on and says that trusted and true resource we've mentioned numerous times because we have
They're
listeners, it may be their first time, and it's I pick out books. I'm going to go on a tangent for a second.
Yeah.
I go to a bookstore. I love bookstores, and when I find a book that's interesting to me, I take a picture of it,
Oh yeah.
and then I because if I impulse buy books, I would have well, I'd have to live in a library, or my house would be a library. So I take a picture of the book, and I may take a picture of a half dozen books any trip I go to a bookstore. And then, next time I'm in town, I go to another bookstore, that one. I do the process over. And then later I go back and look through my pictures and the books that show up often that has spoke to me different times, those are the ones I
Oh,
want to
that's a
buy
great
and read.
idea. That's a
I like
great
that
idea.
idea.
Cody, we need to get off the farm more often
We
to
do.
read some books.
Our second question: what tool could you not live without on your farm?
Well, I would like to say it would be the boys, the livestock guardian dogs and our sheepdog
Yeah.
Dragon, because they are all critical. But also, given this past few years, I think the generator might actually outweigh them just
Jesus.
in the
Oh, yes.
necessity to have all of our barns running so we can milk and cool milk and keep our freezers of meat frozen and get water where we need it to keep livestock watered. And so, with the planned power shutoffs for safety, fire safety, and fires in general, I think the generators have become really important the last 2 years.
And for me, it's a tool that we both use, and that's our phones. To market what we do, takes the requirements of cell phone data and photography and videography, and the applications that allow us to have fun and educate folks.
And it's amazing what your phone can do, and
Yeah,
using it to record wherever you are and to push out stuff. It's just amazing.
it is.
Um, then there's people telling us how bad we are because we're on it too much, but I totally get
That's
it. I
right.
get
Yes,
both sides. Yeah, I'm on it too much, but man, it's a valuable tool.
it is.
What would you tell someone just starting out in agriculture or on a regenerative path?
For me, I think grass and growing grass is something that you just have to start really, really small at if you're not familiar with it at all. And that's just because watching the process of the root structure grow and all of the leaves starting to come out of the surface and the rhizomes spreading. If you had a cut section, that would be even a better process. Obviously, you can do that on YouTube or what have you. But the patience of seeing and the excitement of seeing the growth happen so quick or not so quick during different conditions was really eye opening to me. And that's a 4-H activity that I participated in when working with the university and being a part of 4 generations of a 4-H family. And that is just watching that process of a seed grow into forage.
I think if I were going to give advice to a beginning farmer, I'd say start small, build your plan out, and be prepared for your plan to fail and to need to adapt because that's pretty much how farming works.
Hmm.
We're at the mercy of
Hmm.
the climate and nothing ever goes as planned.
All living systems.
Yes.
Yes, we plan for the perfect year, but we never have a perfect year or
Yes.
ideal year.
The best laid plans of farmers.
That's right.
Yes. And lastly, where can others find out more about you?
FoggyBottomsBoys.com
And
and Instagram and Facebook as well. But we really like to work up our website because that's obviously where we get to sell products through. But you can subscribe to our emails, and we send out emails at least once a month to share a little bit about what's going on or our special deals. And in between that, we have all of Cody's antics on Instagram and Facebook as well,
yeah,
and,
we
and
update
now
Instagram.
TikTok.
Yeah, we
Yeah, don't
update
forget
Instagram.
TikTok in there.
No, and on TikTok it's unorthodox farm daddy, but on Facebook and Instagram, Foggy Bombs Boys, and we update every day.
Very good, Cody and Thomas. I so appreciate y'all coming on and sharing about your journey. I think our listeners are really going to enjoy this episode.
Thank you so much, Cal, for having us.
Thanks for having us.
You're listening to the Grazing Grass Podcast, helping grass farmers learn from grass farmers. And every episode features a grass farmer and their operation. You can find the Grazing Grass Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and we encourage you to share our post. We appreciate it. Are you a grass farmer? Are you interested in sharing about your journey? Go to the grazinggrass.com website, click on Be Our Guest, and fill out the form, and we'll be in touch to see if we can schedule you for your episode. Until next time, keep on grazing grass. That's the normal end, but today I mentioned earlier in the episode about a health issue affecting our schedule. First off, I don't want to take away from Thomas and Cody and the wonderful job they did with this and the wonderful information they shared. However, I've gotten to know many of you through this podcast, and I feel like we're family and friends, so I just want to keep you in the loop about what's happening. My wife was diagnosed with breast cancer, and it's caught early. It's in stage 2, so it's caught early, but we're still going to have to go through a process with that, some chemo and stuff. So that's going to cause our episodes not to be released as often. If you're interested in that journey with breast cancer, my wife and I are releasing a podcast just to bring you along on the journey with the hopes that it helps somebody. And while we don't have that podcast named yet, we have started recording episodes and we'll be releasing them soon. And I'll let you know what the name is. We appreciate your positive thoughts and prayers. And let's sign off again. Until next time, keep on grazing grass. Hey there, listeners. We appreciate you tuning in and want to continue bringing you the best content we can. But producing a podcast takes a lot of time and effort, so we need your support. You can help us out by joining the Grazing Grass community and becoming a supporter for exclusive content and early releases. Also, you can buy our merch to show your love for the show, or by using our affiliate links to purchase products or services we recommend. If you can't support us financially, please spread the word and tell others about our show. Thank you for your support, and we can't wait to bring you more great conversations from grass farmers like you.